If I could hear myself when I say love is bigger than anything in this way.
Good afternoon. How are we doing? All right. So did you grab a bite in DC? It's a little hot. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming back. This is our midday session. And in our midday session, we are talking about narratives, bias, and social justice, all of those. Pretty heavy topics. But we've got some incredible speakers that I'll talk about in just a minute that are going to help us understand how to have these kinds of conversations in America and where we need to go. Before that, I do want to mention a few sort of small details here. One, and first and foremost, we use the question protocol, which is Slido. You've probably seen it on the screen. Those that are online, feel free to also use that as well. And that's your chance to get some voted questions asked here on stage. We'll be using that throughout the segment, so make sure that you get a chance to put in your questions. Always use the hashtags that you've seen on here to as well as share your thoughts and views. And in addition to that, I want to make sure that you all have a chance to get some chocolate before you leave, so hopefully you'll do that too. You'll want to stick around till the end of this session because there's some more surprises for you guests here in person. Sorry, online folks. But there'll be some more things for you that I'll mention later on that you and your special friends can get together. So now let's talk about today's segment. We're first going to talk about bias and also the narratives that are in the public. And that is going to happen with the Ad Council. So our folks, Tony Foleno is going to be mentioning and talking a little bit about his research and what he's been doing at the Ad Council. We'll bring out Heidi, who's with the Gill Foundation Overbeck. Heidi Overbeck, not Gill Overbeck. But Heidi will be there. She'll be talking about one of her campaigns that she's been working on with the Ad Council as well. We'll then transition to visit with my colleagues and friends, Maya, who is Anista Smith, who's actually with Born This Way Foundation, Lady Gaga's foundation, talking about being kind. And then we'll have another panel. We'll get into our social justice track, which is sponsored and supported by Levi Strauss Foundation. I had a little wardrobe change if you were here earlier. So, as you were also checking in as well. So we're thankful to the Levi Strauss Foundation for their support of our social justice track. Chris and Zachary will be talking about their work as social justice pioneers. And then we'll have a wonderful address from Saru, who's been dealing with some very heavy wage issues in the restaurant industry as well. So excited to get there. We also launched research yesterday. Make sure you visit that, causeandsocialinfluence.com/research. Download Influencing Young America to Act. So I want to first introduce Jade. Jade Floyd. Jade, come on out. There you are.
Hi.
How are you? So Jade is the VP of Communications at the Case Foundation.
Yes.
I think we've heard of them from today.
I have.
Yeah, but tell me a little bit about your role there.
Absolutely. So as VP of Communications, I work with our fearless leader, Gene Case, and our dynamic team to really spread goodwill towards the world and to invest in people and ideas that are truly changing the world.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to let you have at it here with this Ad Council campaign.
Yeah. Good morning. Or are we in the afternoon? Afternoon. So, for more than 75 years, the Ad Council has harnessed the power of media and marketing to change the world. Each of you in this audience have heard of some of their campaigns. From Smokey the Bear's Only You Can Prevent Forest Fires, to the Keep America Beautiful anti-pollution efforts. And of course, the crash test dummies that remind us all to wear our seatbelts. But one of the most iconic campaigns was Love Has No Labels. So before we introduce our next speaker, I want us each to watch this Emmy Award-winning video that showcases the issue at hand.
even if I tried, even if I wanted to, and I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to. My love, my love, my love, she keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to. My love, my love, my love, she keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to. My love, my love, my love, she keeps me warm. 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 She keeps me warm.
My heart doesn't see race.
Love has no age limit.
That's my best friend.
We are neighbors and best friends.
We all have different religions, but we have universal love as well.
I love my sister.
Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
Not crying on Sundays, 'cause I'm not crying on Sundays. Patient, love is kind.
Oh, you sit right here.
Thank you.
So, Tony, I've watched this video dozens of times, and I still cheer up.
You know, I wish I could say that I did it myself, but I didn't. But it was from our agency, RGA. It was a terrific creative agency.
And it really shows us the power of conversation and how it shows us what we all have in common. So talk to me a little bit about Love Has No Labels and the campaign.
So that was our kickoff video in 2015. We've been very active since then, but it all comes from the same place and the same issue, which is simply put prejudice and discrimination. And we all know that there's a structural backdrop in the society. We have a long historical backdrop around discrimination around gender, age, race, disability, religion, sexuality, all these different identities. But also it's rooted in implicit bias. The biases that we all have, the shortcuts that we all take when we see somebody and put a label on them and subconsciously make certain associations. So an older woman who's applying for a job, you might assume that she's not good at technology. Or an Asian man, you might assume that he's good at math. These are shortcuts, and I wouldn't even call them stereotypes, but almost unconscious heuristics that are directing people to behave and act and believe in a certain way. So how do you take a campaign about implicit bias? It's like a very dry topic and bring it to life. And how do you do it in a way that you're not yelling at people or scolding people? Because as we all know, that doesn't work. And 85% of this country believes that they're unprejudiced. And that's simply not true. And it's uncomfortable to raise this as a topic. But without doing so and challenging people to recognize their own biases, we can't move forward on it. So our idea was to do it in a very, I think, surprising and appealing way. Mm-hmm. And it's all based in the power of love, the foundation of love, and the recognition that despite all the differences that drive us all apart, there's a lot that really bind us together. And love is the power that helps us recognize that.
So this video, it had a really remarkable run, still is going. How many shares? Tell us a little bit about some of the metrics around it and how you understand at the Ad Council if a campaign is truly successful.
Sure, I'm the research person, so I'll talk all day about metrics, but I only have 2 minutes. But I think what I can tell you is that,
a lot of people say, oh, make me a viral video, or we're going to make a viral video. I say, no, we're going to make a video, and then we're going to try to make it go viral. And that's what we did in this case. It was 300 million views of this particular video alone. About 400 and something million of all of our other videos featuring John Cena, some NFL film video, 10 million shares, comments in the millions. And all the conversations weren't pretty. Some of them were pretty ugly. A lot of them were constructive, and a lot of them were very inspirational. And all that together, the Ad Council, we look at exposure, we look at awareness, whether or not your message is sticking, engagement, all the metrics I just spoke about, but ultimately it's about impact. That's what we're all here for, is impact, right? And it's to move somebody to change an attitude, or more importantly, act, to act on it. In this case, attitudes have been changing that we're associated with this, but also, I think people are starting to recognize in a very hotly contested climate that there is common ground that we could talk about. And I'm a believer in this quote, and I think by Dr. King, that we can try to troll the trolls and hate the haters and things like that, but that's not really our job when we're looking for social justice and equality. It's really to bring our best selves to the table, and understanding that we can't fight hate with hate, but it's actually appealing to people's inborn desire to love, a sense of community, pride in country. All these fundamental American values can help us really, at least at the personal level, get over the hump.
So before you conclude, you've talked really publicly about something called the movable middle in America. Talk to us about who they are and why it's so important to tap that segment of society.
Well, if you're an activist, I think that your initial inclination, right, is to try to grow your base, right, those who agree with you. But in a lot of movements right now, we see that's clearly not working as well as we would like, in climate change, gun control, other issues as well. The idea is we need to appeal to those who disagree with us, find some common ground, and the only way you can do that is through listening, through empathy. Even it doesn't mean agreeing with them, but it means understanding that certain point of view. A lot of research goes into that. And when I say movable middle, that's not just some mushy term. It's a highly researched demographic, psychographic, very well-defined target that we understand everything about and how they relate to a certain issue. And Heidi's going to be talking a little bit about how that played out for the LGBT acceptance campaign. So you'll get a good sense of it there.
Well, thank you, Tony. So before we welcome to stage our next speaker, Heidi Overbeck of the Gill Foundation, I want to tee up a little bit about what she's going to speak about in the Beyond I Do campaign. The Gill Foundation has worked for over 2 decades to advocate for LGBTQ rights. So let's tee up the Beyond I Do campaign video that she'll share more on in just 1 sec.
I, Krista, take you, Jamie, to be my wife.
The ceremony was a blast. It was just like this surreal moment of my dreams are coming true.
When we found out that we were pregnant, we were just elated. We were just sitting there waiting for the pediatrician. She said, "Oh, I apologize. She won't be taking you in as a client."
We are a lesbian couple, but she's just a baby. She's the one you're denying the service to.
And sitting there in that small, cold room, I wanted to cry, just thinking, what did we bring this kid into?
We're simply asking to treat our family the same way that you would treat any family.
Ladies and gentlemen, Heidi Overbeck. Hi, Heidi.
Hi.
So this video is something that no family should ever have to face, no matter where you are across the globe. Talk to us a little bit about the Gill Foundation and what you're trying to do to make sure that this doesn't happen to others.
Sure. So the quick and simple mission of the Gill Foundation is to ensure equal opportunity for all Americans, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. And what I mean by equal opportunity is that, as this video shows, right now in this country, it is legal in 30 states to fire someone, to deny them housing, to refuse critical medical service, simply because they're LGBT. And there's also no federal law that protects LGBT people from discrimination either. And so we are working to change that.
So you're acting with a sense of urgency, obviously. How does the foundation really work towards the outcomes of what you're seeking to achieve in each of these campaigns? What essentially is the role that it plays in the community?
Yeah, this is sort of a critical question for our work across the board, certainly on this campaign too, is how can we instill more urgency around this problem? One of the things we figured out in partnering with the Ad Council is that it's difficult to create urgency if people don't know there's a problem. And in many ways, it seems like we have the public imperative to advance LGBT equality in this country. 80% of Americans support protections for LGBT people. The same percentage of people believe it's already illegal under federal law to discriminate against LGBT people. So, with those numbers, you would think that we'd be making progress on this issue, but it doesn't really feel like that. Not since 2007 has a state passed comprehensive non-discrimination protections for LGBT people. To be sure, there have been some states like New Hampshire just this year that expanded their non-discrimination protections to include transgender people, but fundamentally the map hasn't changed in more than 10 years.
So as each of you in the audience are listening, as well as those online, be sure to ask questions that we'll get into shortly with our audience, with our panelists, and you can ask those via Slido. So my last question for you. Tell us what each of us in this room can do as we go out into our communities, as we're in our workplace, and even in our personal lives. What can we do to fight inequality here within the United States and abroad?
That's such an important question. And I think through the work that we did with the Ad Council when we were doing research on this to understand where the public was at, why we weren't getting traction, we discovered something pretty important. Most people believe that with marriage equality came full equality, or that maybe full equality preceded marriage equality. It's difficult for people to imagine that LGBT people have the right to marry, but they don't have the right to hold a job, live in their home, get critical medical service without the specter of discrimination looming over their head. And so part of it is just simply educating people that that's the case, that marriage equality was not full equality, that there is still a lot of work to do. I think we're fighting a bit of inertia because people were so excited about marriage equality. We had the public behind us, and we won that. And then it was like, great, everyone's equal now. And it's far from it. So I think that the biggest thing is just we're hoping this campaign can educate people that, in fact, millions of LGBT Americans face that risk of discrimination every single day. So simply educating ourselves. And then I think the biggest thing too is just having discussions with your LGBT family, friends, colleagues, with people who are not LGBT. We have learned through other research too that even people who consider themselves to be allies assume that their LGBT friends aren't experiencing discrimination. Well, I've never heard them talk about that. I don't think that's happening to them. We've asked LGBT people on the flip side, why aren't you telling your friends and your family members and your colleagues about what you're experiencing? Well, they've never asked. And so we're in this situation where people aren't asking, people aren't telling, and it's really important to have those conversations because otherwise we just end up with this place of assuming everything's hunky-dory when it's not, as that ad showed.
Tony, what do you think? What can we do in this room?
I'm inclined to say I'm not sure, but I say it's a tough question. But I will say, on a very basic level, I hope it doesn't sound trite, but it's human connection with those who are different from you. The great American sorting that's happening right now, where people are increasingly segregated where they're living, where they are online, who they're socializing with. People are retreating to their tribes, and we know, not just from anecdotes, but through research, interactions and honest conversations and just hanging out with those who are different from you, and this is incumbent upon all of us, is quite important. We know for immigration, when we're trying to have people understand that immigrants to this country are a strength rather than a threat, the best way to remedy this is to actually have immigrants in your community who you're actually interacting with, and you see that you have a lot in common with them. And it's not going to solve the problems, but without doing that, we can't actually, I don't think, do anything else.
So one of the questions that we have from folks, both in the audience and online, is how do you really measure success of these campaigns? Because the issue still is prevalent across the United States. How do you determine when it's time for you to pack up your bags and you're done?
I wish that there was some easy measure of that. I think we're working toward a reality of nationwide non-discrimination protections for LGBT people as quickly as possible. I think at a time not so long ago, we thought that that could be a reality fairly quickly. I think we're now in an environment where political and cultural influences in many ways are especially determined to trigger that us versus them reaction whenever there's sort of the pursuit of equal rights for other folks. And that creates a lot of perception issues and misunderstanding. And just an example of that on the LGBT front specifically, but certainly we're seeing this across the board, is that just last year, 55% of LGBT people reported being the victim of discrimination. That's an 11-point increase from the previous year. At the same time, public perception of discrimination against LGBT people is diminishing. It dropped 13 points between 2013 and 2018. And we're also, though, seeing the public reporting that they feel less comfortable and familiar with LGBT people too. And I think that's why, working with the Ad Council, we have this incredible opportunity to make people feel comfortable and familiar again with LGBT people, to have those conversations, to show that, in fact, these are your friends, your family members in some cases, your neighbors, your colleagues, and just building that connection, that sense of community, and ultimately that understanding that millions of LGBT Americans are at risk in a way that simply others are not. And I think we're using it's subtle in that ad, but you saw that we're using marriage as an entry point for talking about discrimination because the public was with us. And in fact, they are still with us on marriage. We've seen other indicators of LGBT support erode over the last couple of years, but on marriage, it's still strong. So we wanted to use that as an entry point for this discussion, and also to then communicate to people marriage equality did not bring full equality. But I think to the points that Tony has raised too, we're trying to find every way to relate and make sure that people aren't feeling as though LGBT people or anyone else is other. And so this was an ad that showed people in settings that are very relatable universally: marriage, family, in their home, kids. Something that we think our audience can really relate to.
Tony, anything to add?
Well, the job's never going to be done, so we're never going to hang up our hats and go home. But I think it's critical to understand if you're making progress in a more than anecdotal way. I think people hear terms like KPIs and metrics and analytics and kind of say, well, this is not the most exciting part of my job, but it's critical. And not just to get funding, it's to actually understand and chart your strategy. And I could say at the Ad Council, when I first started 15 years ago, they say, how are we doing? And I didn't have enough data to do my job. I didn't really know. Now my problem is exactly the opposite, right? So much data out there. You're watching it. And the challenge is putting a narrative over it and understanding what the most important indicators are. And I will just say, at the Ad Council, I work on 35 different social issues. Each has different objectives. Each has a different set of analytics, metrics, but they all come down to one thing. Each one has a North Star of an attitude, or more importantly, a behavior change. If you're not moving people to act, then it's nice, but not sustainable. And I think that's the key piece most organization advocates really have to do is, how are we moving the needle on action, and what is that action leading to? And there's ways to measure that.
So our last question has 8 upvotes, so I must ask. Talk to us, before we leave, more about the movable middle. How do you reach them? How do you talk to them? How do you influence them?
Well, I'll start. I'll talk a little bit. I'll say one of my first principles in research is we're obligated to listen to those that we're trying to reach, and listening is the first step always. And not just talking to experts on the issue, talking to those who are actually hearing their personal narratives and stories. So that's step 1. Step 2 is understanding the media landscape that surrounds them, and where they're residing online and off, and how they're consuming media. And then most importantly, is really understanding the psychographics. I think people think about the movable middle for, say, LGBT acceptance. Might be some well-meaning middle-aged mom who drives a SUV in Arkansas, and we have all these demographics. Start with values, start with psychographics, move from there. It's not so much about what you look like and what your demographics are. And then you could put together a full persona, a full portrait of it. And for the movable middle, in this case, for LGBT acceptance, we have, it's not a short report. It's very in-depth, and it has many different layers to it. And we're happy to share it at some point. We don't have time right now, but this is not just because I'm a research person, but just do your research. Any of your communications efforts should start with the person you're starting to reach and understanding everything about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that in terms of how to reach the movable middle, Tony's right. Who we're trying to reach it's a complex persona. But in terms of the creative direction that we had for this campaign, there were 3 really critical but pretty simple directives that we had. One was to tell very real and clear stories of discrimination. Discriminatory behavior is very easy for people to dismiss. I think they want to believe that everyone's motivated by their better angels, and so you could have a story of discrimination where it was like, well, was that actually because they were violating the social media policy, and it wasn't actually about posting a picture with their spouse. So we needed to find stories that left no doubt at all that this was true discrimination. The second piece was to spotlight storytellers in a way that would feel really relatable to our audience. So that's, again, what I was mentioning about let's show them with their families, in their neighborhoods, with their loved ones. But it also meant, too, that we needed to be really conscious about no pride flags, no other LGBT iconography, because it would immediately trigger an out-group reflex for that audience, and so we needed to pull back on that. And then the third piece, was, again, just to educate our audience in a very accessible and compelling way, and not in a way that would feel condescending or elitist, that we're talking down to people. The LGBT landscape has, even though equality has been long in the making, the landscape has evolved very rapidly over the last couple of years, and I think the public, and especially the movable middle, is just trying to establish that baseline understanding of LGBT issues. So we needed to meet them where they were at, not where we wanted them to be.
Well, thank you both. Before we depart, I want to just recap the things that resonated the most from both of you. 1, we all have unconscious bias. 2nd, that despite our differences, we all have something in common. That there is a common ground, and that we can find common ground through listening to each other. And that we really need to start with the person that we're trying to reach at their core. And we need to spotlight storytellers, which is what we're doing today. So thank you both for taking the time to sit with us, and thank to each of you for taking the time out of your busy days to really immerse yourself in all the content here at the summit. So we will see you soon. Thank you.